Hey everyone, I'm Cary Smith and I'm sitting here with Cheri Turner.
Right.
And Cheri and I are both with Client First Capital. And Cheri, I think we have a great topic for today's video. And so the title is Master Retirement Spending. And so often we think about retirement as savings, right? And how do we save the right way and the
Right.
right amount and everything else. But it's also about knowing how to spend wisely.
Hmm.
And when I look back for people that are already retired, if you look back at your portfolio throughout 2023 and last year, 2024, you probably felt pretty good about spending and not paying too close attention to your budget because your portfolio most likely was doing so well,
Right.
right? With the S&P, 500 sitting records and just, everything going so well. But now as we're heading into 2025 and we're starting to feel a market downturn and we're starting to see maybe our portfolio recede a little bit,
Hmm.
for a lot of people, they don't feel as comfortable spending what they were spending before when their portfolio is not generating the kind of growth it was generating before. And
Absolutely.
so, depending on how you're invested and your comfort level and how much you have, you might feel different about spending. But nonetheless, this is a really good time to talk about how do we spend carefully
Hmm.
and keep in mind our budgets, right? And
Right.
so,
Mhm.
really good time for us to talk about this, and a really good time that I think a lot of retirees or people planning to retire are starting to think about their spending a little bit more when they see their portfolios maybe under a little more stress.
Right.
So the first thing I want to talk about, though, before we talk about spending, is just really understanding our income sources in
Right.
retirement. And
Right.
so let's just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, most people have a number of sources of income that are coming in throughout retirement. The primary being most individuals are receiving Social Security. So you want to not only look at what you're getting, but look at optimizing, right? So you want to not only look at whether you're going to get Social Security income, but looking at when you're going to start taking. What we find is that if you have a decent expected life expectancy and expect to live beyond 80, 81, 82, it's typically considered most advantageous to go ahead and wait to claim until 70. If, however, you don't have longevity in your family or you've had, an array of health issues, then you might want to go ahead and claim earlier in order to maximize those benefits.
Yeah, Social Security is a topic we talk about a lot with our
Mhm.
clients and in our
Exactly.
videos. And yeah, so knowing, how and when to claim Social Security benefits is important. Also, you need to understand, your options if you have a pension,
Mhm.
right? Do you want to take that pension in a monthly payout, or do you want to take it in a lump sum? And if you do, what are your options, and how do you do that wisely? And looking at the advantages and disadvantages of each of those. So understanding pension plans is another piece of the income.
Right, right. And then as we talked about earlier, obviously a majority of people are saving in preparation for retirement. So when you look at that savings and utilizing that for retirement, you're having investment withdrawals that you take. Sometimes that might be from a brokerage account or your IRA or a Roth IRA. But you want to ensure that you have a strategy so that you can have sustainable tax efficient withdrawals.
Yeah. Also in the income category, a lot of clients have other sources of income. And so we've seen people who have purchased annuities, right? They were looking for some type of guaranteed portion of their portfolio. So they got an annuity. They may have some dividends or rental income, right? And
Mhm.
so, but it's also pulling those things together and looking at and counting those as your income sources to make sure that as you're looking at what are you bringing in, what's available for you as we move into looking at the next topic, which is expenses,
Right.
right? So now that we know, you add all those up and you know what income's available, then we start looking at the expenses. And there's even though you're retired and maybe your life is simpler, my personal experience is your expenses aren't necessarily simpler, right?
Right. Right.
And in fact, in some areas they may be greater than they were before.
Right, true, very true. And then you want to kind of look at the different categories of your spending as well.
Mhm.
You have your essential expenses, which include your housing, your healthcare, food and transportation. And some of those tend to be pretty static. If you have a housing payment, then that tends to be pretty standard. Your healthcare premiums are probably set. Your food and transportation can vary. And so that's part of the aspect of the essential expenses that you want to incorporate into your spending and be very intentional around.
Yeah. And this is an area where you want to focus a little bit, because healthcare is a good example of an area where you might have Medicare and maybe Medicare supplement and long-term care insurance, but your utilization of healthcare sometimes goes up as you get older, right?
Absolutely.
And that
Mhm.
utilization can cause a rise in your expenses. And so you want to look at these things carefully, but also, so those are your essential expenses, but also there's the discretionary expenses,
Mhm.
right? So when you retire, you're probably going to want to travel more. You're going to maybe get into some of your hobbies a little bit more and spend some more
Mhm.
money there. Entertainment, all of those sorts of things, right? And so you want to be as detailed as you can and looking forward to what you think you might do. When I retired from the corporate world and just spent a fair amount of time just being retired,
Mhm.
there were certain categories where my expenses went up, and
Right.
most of those were in leisure and hobbies and exercise and things of that nature.
Yes.
And I didn't see my retirement expense go down. I saw myself spending more time and more money
Right.
on those
You
categories.
make an interesting point, Carrie, and that's a lot of times when we're younger and we're looking for opportunities to cut expenses from our budget, it's really easy to say, oh, let's not eat out as often, or I don't need to buy that extra coffee in the morning on the way to work. But for retirees, what we find is that sometimes these are the places where connection happens.
Yeah,
Going to coffee and sitting with that group of buddies might be your only connection throughout the day, or going to dinner with your girlfriends, and maintaining those connections and relationships is actually where a lot of the joy and satisfaction in retirement comes in. So really being able to differentiate which of those expenses bring you joy.
that's right. I would make an argument that you might enjoy that cup of coffee a little bit more when you're retired.
Yeah.
Cost the same, but you might enjoy it a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. And then also, you have to think about inflation, and inflation, sometimes it's low and it's just not something that we think about a lot. And then other times, it's higher, but, for no matter what, it's going to fluctuate, and we'll have periods of higher inflation and periods of lower inflation. But you need to think about that and factor that into your future expenses, right?
Right.
It's too big of a factor to ignore, even if it's a small number. And
Mhm.
so considerations for inflation need to be factored into your budget over time.
Most definitely. And then the last area, Carrie, is healthcare.
Mhm.
We all know that as we age and our bodies age, our medical expenses unfortunately tend to increase over time. So there are certain medical costs that are associated with just aging and getting older, and those increase. But then also there are those end of life, expenses, the long term care, and those kinds of expenses that need to be accounted for and planned out.
That's right. That's right. So then also you have to create, in the process of creating a retirement budget, right? There's a lot of things to
Mhm.
consider. So one is your fixed versus your variable expenses. So it's
Mhm.
prioritizing your necessities over your wants. And then, maybe there's another step there that is, once then also prioritizing your wants, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and so you're probably going to be able to do you're going to be able to do all your necessities. You'll probably be able to do some of your wants, but you want to make sure that you're prioritizing those as well, so that
Mhm.
you're just getting the most satisfaction and enjoyment out of life in your retirement.
Right, absolutely. And then another area is cash flow management.
Mhm.
We talked about looking at your expenses and your income. And so it's essentially just ensuring that that income that you've accounted for is able to cover your expenses and, having those all accounted for and
Yeah.
covered.
And then, a lot of times retirees don't think they need a emergency fund,
Hmm.
right? A lot of times, I used to think early in my career, the emergency fund was what if something happened to my job or my wife's job and we had to live with only one income for a while, and so we'd have an emergency fund so that if something like that happened, or if there was a major expense, right, the AC going out or whatever, right, we had something to be able to fund that so that we wouldn't have to go into debt, right, or sell some of our retirement assets or other savings, potentially at a loss.
Right.
Well, this becomes even more important for retirees because you don't want your satisfaction in life to depend upon the fluctuations in the market in your portfolio. You want to have some amount, a year, maybe even 2 years of assets that are sitting in something fairly liquid,
Right.
so that you've got access to those without having to sell at a loss. And so an emergency fund, I think, is maybe even more important as you retire, but definitely at least as important.
Right.
So.
Right. Good point. Because when you have that sufficient emergency fund and you have those fluctuations in the market, you aren't forced to sell out in order to create cash.
Yeah, you probably sleep a little better knowing that there's no immediate impacts to
Right.
your lifestyle, regardless of what happened in the market that day.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And then the last thing is, when you do see that portfolio fall, looking at cutting any unnecessary costs, coming back to the budget and seeing where are the areas where you had those variable expenses and how much fluidity is in that. What can you bring that down to, still be comfortable, but, adjust to that difference in returns that you're experiencing for a period of time.
No one wants to spend money they don't have to spend. And
Right.
one area that just drives, I know it drives us crazy when we're working with our clients and we see it, and that's paying more in taxes than you need to be paying in taxes, right?
Right.
And so have a good tax strategy in retirement so that you're reducing, your tax burden and you're not paying more than you have to pay. And be smart with your spending. And when there are areas where it makes sense to downsize in those areas, right? So yes, cutting unnecessary costs, I think, is important.
Yes, absolutely. And then lastly, you want to ensure that you have smart withdrawal strategies. Essentially, one of the primary things is ensuring that you have a tax efficient withdrawal strategy. Most typically, this involves initially pulling your taxable assets first so that you reduce and eliminate those eventually. And then you shift to your tax deferred and then your Roth or your tax free.
Yep. Okay. So, so there's also required RMD, required minimum distributions, right? So you want to make sure that you're managing those wisely. A lot of times your financial planner, your asset manager can help you with the best strategies there if you don't have a handle on that yourself.
Right.
And then, as something a lot of people are thinking about probably, now as we're seeing a lot of fluctuation in the market is, do I need to adjust my spending during market downturns? And so, for some people, that's a way to keep from putting more stress on their portfolio. And so it's something to consider. So, Cheri, unless you have any last thoughts, I think we've covered this topic pretty well.
Yeah, most definitely. It sounds good.
All right. Well, if you found some value in this topic, give us a like. We're a growing firm, and this helps other people find us and check out our videos and helps us help them. And then also, if you want to find more of our videos, you can find us at clientfirstcap.com. And from there, you can find a link to our videos. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter to learn more about different topics that we write about, typically about approaching or living in retirement. Or if you want to meet with one of us, you can just give us a call, reach out to us, and schedule an appointment from our website as well. So thanks for tuning in, Cheri. It's good to see you.
You too, Cary. Thanks for being here.
All right. See you.
Bye.